Director Joe Dante has always taken a gleefully adversarial stance towards power and corporate greed, whether it's in the cartoonishly overbuilt Clamp Industries from Gremlins 2, run by a Trump-inspired absentee mogul, or the conniving military brass of Piranha, who precipitate the release of flesh-eating fish into a public river. In his 1998 film Small Soldiers, both corporate greed and military recklessness are sent up in the form of Gil Mars, the fast-talking executive of Globotech, a weapons company with an eye towards diversification. Globotech obviously wants to put its finger in a variety of pies, as we see in the film's opening introduction.
For the first time, you and yours will enjoy the same high-quality standards as demanded by the U.S. Defense Department at private sector prices. Globotech, turning swords into plowshares.
A wry corporate commercial soft-pedaling the intrusion of weapons manufacturing into people's everyday lives. Mars' most recent acquisition is Heartland Play Systems, a children's toy company, and he has scant time to speak with the two remaining employees, Larry and Irwin. We can imagine Mars is probably going to 10 similar meetings with different companies right after this, sampling their wares, surveying his new purchases with fleeting curiosity, adding input, and then flying out in the company jet. Irwin and Larry have both prepared separate presentations for possible new toy lines. Irwin is shy and well-meaning, but his presentation is not so good. His Gorgonites, freakish monsters with an educational component, are not what Mars wants to see. Larry, however, has a little more flash. His toys have pizzazz.
Chip Hazard, leader of the Commando Elite.
The Commando Elite, badass soldiers, muscle-bound and camouflaged, are right up Mars' alley. He falls in love with the idea of an interactive line of action heroes and leaves the entire arsenal of Globotech resources, literally, at Larry's disposal, to make the toys spectacular. His last idea before being swept out the door is to take Irwin's misshapen, misunderstood teaching monsters and turn them into cannon fodder for the high-tech military heroes.
Enemies, see these hideous, ugly freaks. These guys are the enemy, and our guys have to seek them out and vaporize them.
Mars can't see beyond mere appearances, and he has no interest in education. Instead, he wants action and fast thrills. He wants the Commando Elite. In the eyes of the film, this makes him short-sighted, a chauvinist, in short, basically the villain of the picture. While acquiring a diversity of holdings, Globotech is still built for one thing: war. Therefore, this ethos, what the company was originally built to do, will obviously spread to everything they make, including toys. Small Soldiers was the fifth live-action film produced by then-new up-and-coming studio DreamWorks SKG, an effort of industry titans Steven Spielberg, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and David Geffen. When it came time to market the movie, a movie in which the Commando Elite are very much the villains, the DreamWorks marketing team ironically came to the same conclusion as Gil Mars. Lead with Chip Hazard. Lead with the Commandos. They were on the poster, forefront in the trailer, and the stars of the promotional campaign.
Answer the question! Did you order the rodeo burger?
You're darn right I did. It was flame broiled and delicious.
Burger King salutes small soldiers with a tasty new rodeo burger.
The Gorgonites were simply too ugly and weird. We have to infer, then, that what a movie studio is built to do primarily is make money. And the Commandos, while being the antagonists of the film, were, in fact, its most sellable element, and ultimately a film which rails against, albeit in very subtle ways, profiteering, marketing, war, ironically became packaged as a mass-market consumer item with its main villains as the primary selling point. There's a lot of duality in Small Soldiers, both within the universe of the film and externally in the way that it was positioned to audiences. An anti-war picture marketed with battlefield action, two toy makers, one with his eye on the bottom line, one with artistic aspirations, one toy store, humble, one massive and commercial. Two families, neighbors in fact, one idealistic old hippies, the other tech-brained and efficiency-minded. Two sets of toys, one grotesque and strange, yet pure of heart. The other rough and straight-laced, yet driven by rage and hatred.
There will be no mercy.
Small Soldiers features a vaguely compelling protagonist, Alan Abernathy. We are told he has a history of acting out.
I know you. You're that kid that set his old school on fire, right?
Yeah, just to watch it burn.
Whatever.
But he generally seems like a nice, wholesome kid. The film doesn't have the guts to make him a real punk like Eddie Furlong in Terminator 2. He's been put in charge of running his dad's toy store while he's out of town at a conference. The store, the inner child, is a gentle, wholesome place, full of toys meant to stimulate the minds and imaginations of children, or as the name implies, the hobbyist adult. Alan has a fateful meeting with a delivery driver played by Dante regular Dick Miller, who happens to have a shipment of Globotech's brand new action toy line, the Commando Elite, and their hapless enemy, the Gorgonites, riding along in his truck. Despite his father's principled stance against selling war toys, Alan, motivated by commerce, strikes a deal with Miller to buy a set, 12 in all, of these exciting new products.
Don't worry about my dad. By the time he gets back, they'll all be sold. And this place will have made a little money for once.
Alan senses instantly that these toys will sell. And how could they not? They look spectacular. Blood-red boxes with a pop of explosive yellow. The toys themselves, the perfect size. I'd guess they're about a foot tall, a quarter of the size of the kids who are meant to be playing with them. Manageable enough to manipulate and play with, but big enough that you need both hands to comfortably carry them, kind of like a gun. They have a sense of themselves at this size, something like autonomy, which of course, they gain. Unbeknownst to Alan, the toys have been animated like little Frankenstein's monsters and given life, in a roundabout way, by the military-industrial complex. Endowed with artificial intelligence by a groundbreaking munitions chip, they begin to act out their prescribed roles. The Commando elite, a dominant, decisive, and tactical force, tear the store apart in Alan's absence as they act out their programming and attempt to eradicate the Gorgonite scum. Eventually, Alan discovers there is something strange about these toys. The Gorgonite leader, Archer, is oddly interactive.
What did you say?
He may in fact be alive in some sense of the word, aware, sentient, or at least behaves as if he is. Alan returns with Archer to the toy store and finds that it has been torn apart. The Gorgonites escape the onslaught of the Commandos unscathed, but were forced to endure the embarrassment of hiding in the trash. This is okay because, as Archer outlines, hiding is in their nature. Eventually, the Commandos' war expands to Alan, who they see as harboring the enemy. And before their reign of terror is over, they've ensnared Alan's love interest Christy and drawn both of their families into the unfolding chaos of their small-scale war. There's a built-in storyline for the action figures in the film, one in which the Commandos are the heroes and the Gorgonites are the villains. Very similar to many popular toy lines of the 1980s and 90s. Lines like He-Man or G.I. Joe, who fight against the evil forces of Skeletor and Cobra, respectively. It's arguable as to whether or not this innovation of the 1980s, the establishing of a narrative around a toy line, made the play behaviors of children, I'm speaking mostly of young boys, more compelling, or whether it stripped children of the autonomy to create their own story and identity around whatever toy they engaged with. But now with He-Man or G.I. Joe, goodness or badness of a specific toy, or its personality and role, had been pre-established by writers at Mattel or at Hasbro. Their identities were imbued into them. Same goes for the Commando elite and the Gorgonites. The film never gives us an answer as to whether or not the munitions chips placed in the toys gave them specific personalities or moral directives, and look, I don't fault the film for that necessarily. It's probably an overabundance of detail, but I do find it fun to think about. I have to conclude that, no, the toys were merely animated to life by the chips, and thus, something about their inherent nature informed their personalities. And what do I mean by inherent nature? Well, I'll give you an example, pretty simple. Look around your house at various inanimate objects. If they were to spontaneously spring to life, what would they be like? Evil or good, apathetic or caring? Would they be a brave little toaster or a chaotic evil? And by this I mean, often an object's essence is defined by how we relate to it. This is called Object Essentialism, and it's been studied and written about extensively by psychologist Paul Bloom. In his book, Descartes' Baby, he writes, "We see objects as more than what they appear to be. We see them as having invisible essences that make them what they are. In Small Soldiers, the design of the toys, how they look, the cultural narrative around their appearance informs their behavior. There's a moment in the film where these soldier toys cannibalize Christie's collection of Gwendy dolls, which are an obvious parody of Barbie dolls, in order to enlist them in their war effort, which is sort of proof that Larry and Globotech did not imbue the chips with personality because they could not have anticipated being used in Gwendy dolls. Yet when the dolls come alive, they act a certain way. They are ruthless, catty, bitchy, and a stereotype of the worst kind of materialistic woman.
Don't hate me because I'm beautiful.
Therefore, we are to conclude that this personality, this is the true essence of the Gwendy doll. And why is this? Well, maybe because there is a certain strain of cultural thought around the Barbie products that arises in some spectators of impossible beauty standards, of the glorification of materialism or beauty, so much so that when they come alive in this film, their personalities ring true, or at least it's a familiar notion. So who or what imbues the toys their true essence? Well, in the world of the film, it's society, or maybe their creators. Why do I say creator? Well, the reason why the Commandos are driven to maim, destroy, and cause mayhem is because they were conceived by their creators, Larry and Gil, to act as such, and they look as such. Also, they appear like caricatures of infantry grunts, especially Vietnam-era American military, and thus are imbued with negative ideas orbiting the notion of that type of soldier in certain segments of society. Ideas that have been reinforced by films, politicians, and cultural movements.
Son, you can be a prisoner or a casualty. It's up to you.
The Gorgonites, therefore, must be imbued with the spirit of Irwin, who so obviously cares about them in a very personal way and created them with certain intentions in mind. There's even a slightly touching moment where he sees his creatures come to life and speaks to them like old friends or like children.
I'm Irwin. I designed you. And all the Gorgonites.
He's the creator. Oi.
He even seems to be able to anticipate their behavior. But what cultural idea is embodied by the Gorgonites? They are all rather unique creations. They don't immediately conjure up ideas based on other media experiences like the Commandos. They don't remind us of negative stereotypes from films like Casualties of War or Platoon. But they do have an inherent otherness. Other implying a sort of minority status, or ideas around one's impression of victimized populations. Patricia Williams, amongst other academics, have written on this as it pertains to Star Wars, which I think is a good example. There's an essay she wrote for The Nation, The Phantom Menace and the Racial Politics of Science Fiction, in which she claims that alien figures are often stand-ins for minority groups. So this is all well and good within the structure of the narrative, but ultimately the buck has to stop with Joe Dante and the writers of the film. For convenience sake, I will be attributing all decisions to Dante as he had the final say. Dante, an outspoken liberal, I would assume has sympathy for victimized minorities, which I don't think is a stretch to claim the Gorgonites represent. And of Chip Hazard and the other Commando elite, why evil? Of course, object essentialism has to have some element of subjectivity to it. It's obvious that some, I'd say most, people might look at a soldier toy and think positive thoughts. In an average American audience, ideas associated with American soldiers might come to mind. Bravery, gratitude, heroism, etc. Yet Hazard and his men are tapped as the villains of the film. A subversion of expectations derived from Dante's progressive politics. The, I guess you could call it implicit criticism of the military, I think is very pronounced in a film like Piranha. Let's look at Chip Hazard, the leader of the Commando elite. He's instantly iconic, at least for me, without having seen the film, but having seen him in the toy aisle and at Burger King, I was captivated. His white, angular, crew-cut, square jaw, powerful big hands and feet. I took him for the good guy. Upon further inspection, though, there's something off about him. The light-up lightning bolt skull has a fascistic connotation, and his camouflage, these kind of tiger stripes, resemble the lizard-like markings of the evil gremlins, patterned after poisonous creatures in the animal kingdom, nature's warning to stay away. He's a little too perfect, and if there's anything 80s movies taught us, it's that too perfect, too Aryan maybe, is a sign of evil, an artifice which masks something indecent that must be lying below the surface. He's also a fairly one-note character, as are the rest of the Commandos. Tommy Lee Jones, the voice of Chip Hazard, does a nice job here, but he speaks in slogans, puns, and jokes intended for audiences who had seen Platoon, Apocalypse Now, or Full Metal Jacket.
Don't fire till you see the whites of his eyes.
He's not much of a character, and neither are the other Commandos. They're composite characters made up of tropes from war movies. They're actually voiced by the remaining cast of the Dirty Dozen. They don't have inner lives or a desire to broaden their knowledge, as we are so often shown the Gorgonites having the capacity to do. Archer studies the internet. He asks existential questions. The Commandos are all rather similar. They have certain features, like mohawks or earrings, but they are generally fairly uniform, whereas the Gorgonites are a grab bag of disparate ideas that don't really fit together. One is like a big dinosaur rhino thing with an orange guy that bounces around on his back. The other is a big eye. Archer is obviously the most sympathetic, given mammalian qualities, a lion's muzzle, whiskers, like a household pet, wider eyes. And Archer also has ancient weaponry. None of the Gorgonites have guns, by the way. He's got a loincloth, which connotes a pastoral or ancient nature, rather than the high-tech aggressive modernity of the Commandos. Interestingly, though, the Commandos have much more screen time than the Gorgonites, and even though they're evil, they're much more entertaining.
What are you packing, Tiny?
Packing you.
They are the stars of the show. They parade around wreaking havoc in machines of war cobbled together from spare parts and household appliances, which, when divorced from their primary use as tools to keep a home, take on a sinister aura. Nail guns, chemicals, toasters, and lawnmowers, all enlisted by the forces of evil. Perception again. To the average user, this little tool is a utensil to make the eating of corn on the cob easier. To the Commandos, it's a bladed projectile. In one of the more memorable action sequences, the Commandos pursue Christy and Alan on their motorbike, set to the rousing song War by Edwin Starr, a song that is, in actuality, and on a lyrical level, anti-war. But conversely, it extenuates the action of the scene and evokes feelings of aggression and excitement. It makes one think about the impossibility of making a truly anti-war film, like Truffaut said. To show something is to ennoble it. Even the most anti-war film, no matter what its message, will end up making war look like fun. And this movie is fun. It's a lot of fun. Let's not forget why we're all here, which is to watch the Commandos wage war on suburbia, and they do indeed. 2 houses, specifically. The Abernathy home, and Alan's parents, and Christy and her family, the Fimples, headed by patriarch Phil Hartman, who plays the high-tech consumerist foil to Stuart Abernathy, Alan's dad, and his wife, played by Ann Magnuson. They're eventually forced to come together to defend their homes from the rampaging toys, but early on we see their relationship as nothing but acrimonious. We're introduced to Hartman as he cuts down a tree on a disputed property line. It's obvious the Abernathys appreciate nature and hominess, while Hartman, obsessed over the specifications of his big shot sound system and TV, is a consumerist drone, obsessed with efficiency and orderly comfort.
No. This tree is beautiful. That dish is just one more piece of techno crap to go along with the rest of your stockpile of techno crap.
Hartman's character is a thematic callback to the subject of much ire in Gremlins 2 and the Clamp Corporation's obsession with the latest tech, despite its deleterious effect on the human beings who work in the building. And remember the distinctions of the Gorgonites and the Commandos. High-tech bad, pastoral good. And so, inevitably, Hartman's technology is turned against him by the Commandos.
Is that my JVC?
The Abernathy house is somewhat quaint, but it's cozy. Alan's room is messy, but indicates passion and creativity, just like the Gorgonites. The Fimple house is cold and sterile, and Christie's room is perfectly manicured, with the obligatory 16 magazine posters of the latest pop star, while also being adorned with a shrine to her Gwendy dolls. But in the heat of the excitement, when the doll's true nature is revealed, she exclaims,
Always hate these things!
Which is maybe a somewhat incongruous and cheap laugh line, but perhaps, if read charitably, indicates a break from her parents' inclinations, her having defeated the need to collect and be reverent towards consumer goods. And what of the other neighbors? Well, strangely, there aren't any. Fire and fury is exploding in the streets. Chip Hazard has recruited hundreds of new toy soldiers to his cause, yet not a peep from the neighbors. All we get is this simple cutaway.
Simple.
Again, is this another cheap laugh line? A plot contrivance? I don't know. But it's interesting to compare the sanguine and seemingly apathetic neighbors of Small Soldiers with the hyper-communal, if paranoid, neighbors in Dante's film The Burbs just 9 years earlier. We all know that neighborliness has fallen off in recent decades, that the amount of socializing the average American household engages in, whether that be a cocktail party, barbecue, or bowling league, has been cut more than in half since the 1950s. Even if this portrayal is unconscious or unintentional in this film, this growing apart of people seems to be a product of our immaculate home entertainment systems, of increasing political and social differences, and other distractions that have driven communities apart from each other. Both ailments are exhibited here in the Abernathys and the Fimples, and their strained relationship. Maybe the Globotechs of the world are to blame. I don't hate Gil Mars for wanting to make a toy that punches through the box, but in the old days, a child had to pretend, whereas Gil's goal was to make a fully automated toy that essentially played with itself, leaving the end user, the child, a passive spectator to a toy predestined to behave in a certain way. Globotech's goal is to make passive consumers of all of us and corner the market in everything. In the end, astoundingly, Mars is able to buy everyone off. This is one of my favorite moments in the movie, this dark satirical touch where even the most indignant of the adults, the most ideologically opposed to Gil Mars and his entire project, are neutralized with cash.
And my garage, and my audio-visual component system, and this is good, thanks.
Bye.
A big check, and their concerns, principles, and moral indignation are wiped away.
And what about the pain and the anguish and the
humiliation?
The humiliation. I don't think even you have enough money to pay for that. Okay, maybe you do.
I can't help but think that Gil is modeled on the no doubt myriad of studio executives that Dante has dealt with over the years. But Alan stays true. He saved the day. To me, the casual viewer of this film, I always felt the ending for the Gorgonites was rather prescribed and dull. Okay, I guess there were some scenes where the Gorgonites expressed a vague longing for a higher idea, for knowledge, for self-determination, and now at the end they finally get that. But I think the real triumph of the Gorgonites is their ability to self-actualize through the encouragement of Alan, and maybe a shift in the way they were perceived. They realized their fates weren't necessarily predestined, and that they had it within themselves to be brave. In Marjorie Williams' classic story, The Velveteen Rabbit, quite possibly the first tale to grapple with the idea of inherent spiritual essence. In an inanimate object, the Velveteen Rabbit has a sort of spiritual crisis alleviated somewhat by the wise words of the old skin horse who tells him, "Real isn't how you are made. It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just play with, but really loves you, then you become real." Let's set aside the term real and for the sake of argument classify the term real not in terms of rabbitness, but instead think about the importance of the child, the perceiver of the toy, imbuing it with something. I can't help but notice the way Archer, and for a puppet of an action figure, he's a very expressive one. Great work by Stan Winston and his team. Anyway, I can't help but notice that Archer, in observing Alan, seems less like he's analyzing Alan than waiting for Alan to observe him, to make him real through acknowledgement. And in a way, Alan's battle was also one of perception, and his victory comes not when he defeats the evil action figures, but when his stature has changed in the neighborhood and amongst his small community, and he has proven himself in the eyes of others. His parents perceived him as volatile, untrustworthy, and immature. Now he is seen as heroic and as having foresight. Christy saw him as just another kid from high school, but he has proven to be much more. Is this a good movie? It's a fine film, but it's elevated by nostalgia for me, I have to be honest. It feels too much like a movie you'd read and say, you know what, Joe Dante should direct this. Or I imagine it was written by someone who was inspired, had to be, by Gremlins, by Dante's earlier work. And you can also feel the impression of Jeffrey Katzenberg here, a guy who, with ants, tried to one-up his former employer Disney and their movie Bug's Life. And here you can kind of feel that he's making his adult, badass PG-13 Toy Story. However, after watching this film again, I found myself with a lot to think about, especially about these little toys and what they represent culturally, what the caricature of Chip Hazard means, or Archer, and it becomes a little more interesting. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Hope you like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.
Too bad. This would have made a hell of a commercial.